Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With fishingbooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. Fishingbooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to fishingbooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
What if the grocery stores didn't open tomorrow? Not empty shelves, not panic buying, not chaos, just closed. You drive to one locked, another also locked. The lights are off. A printed sheet of paper is taped to the door, closed until further notice. So now things are different for you. There's no rice, no flour, no cooking oil, no fresh vegetables, no coffee, not forever, just not tomorrow. Suddenly you realize something uncomfortable. You've built your daily life around a place you barely think about. We talk about self-reliance, we talk about wild food, we talk a lot about hunting and fishing and harvesting. But the truth is, we're more connected to the grocery store than we admit. Today's episode isn't alarmist, it isn't apocalyptic. It's a thought experiment. If grocery stores quietly disappeared for a while, what would actually change? And would we be ready?
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast, and I'm Justin Townsend.
And I'm Adam Berkelmans.
Before we imagine the future, we should probably look backwards. We've never fully lost grocery stores in modern North America, but we've come close enough to stress test the system several times. Adam, walk us through that.
Yeah, we've experienced food stress, but not collapse per se, like not a full collapse. During the Great Depression, like agriculture didn't disappear altogether, but access to things like proteins and other kitchen staples absolutely did. People were stretching their flour, they were diluting their soups, they were eating cuts of meat that had fallen out of favor recently in meat trends. So you're eating a lot of like offal in different parts. While the game became common once more, not because it was trendy, but because it was a necessity for many families just to get that protein. Gardens weren't extracurricular hobbies like they are today. They were very serious lifelines for food and family. Then World War II, rationing was in full force, sugar was limited, butter was limited, meat was limited. Entire populations adjusted to constraint, and with that, recipe culture shifted, whereby substitution became the norm when making meals. We can see this in most warrior cookbooks. Most of the recipes are there explaining how to stretch out certain proteins and certain ingredients rather than what to make that taste really good. At their peak, Victory Gardens produced roughly 40% of fresh vegetables in America, which is that the Americans were eating, not to be shipped overseas. And that required national mobilization, government messaging, and a full cultural shift towards growing food at home. That's how much local production mattered when supply chains tightened. And that's something we don't really have anymore in a big way. And then there's that event that's still fresh in all of our minds, I'm sure, COVID, which wasn't a production crisis like World War II. There was enough food. It was actually a distribution shock. So yeast disappeared, pasta vanished, meat plants closed, temporarily or fully. People hoarded things like beans and flour, and many of them didn't even know how to use them. A lot of people were hoarding flour without knowing how to bake, hoarding beans without knowing how to deal with them, probably thinking those beans are pretty crunchy, soaking them first. None of these moments signified a full collapse. They were more of a stress test, and they revealed something very simple. Our food system works because it works constantly. Interrupt the flow, even briefly, and the foundation and our confidence in it begins to crack. And those interruptions can be from numerous things, from pandemics and wars and all sorts of stuff like that, economy crashes, weather events. There's a lot of things that can interrupt that flow.
I think one of the biggest events we saw too recently, I think even since before COVID, are like the dock strikes, where food was just sitting rotting on ships as it came into the country, and things like bananas and different fruits and vegetables that were grown in other parts of the world not working. But people don't think about sort of like the majority of your seafood coming from other places. Like, there are definitely local seafood places and suppliers, distributors, fishermen, but a lot of that is caught or farm raised elsewhere, and that's what people tend to buy because it's less expensive versus sort of supporting the local fishing business.
Yeah.
But we tend to treat grocery stores like buildings, but they're not individual buildings. They're networks. And a grocery store is part of a global shipping system. It's refrigeration infrastructure. It's agriculture forecasting. It's diesel fuel. It's packaging plants. It's migrant labor. It's trucking schedules that run within hours of perfection. The produce section, it's not just lettuce. It's not just broccoli. It's not just onions or potatoes. It's timing. The meat counter, it's not steak. It's not ground meat. It's not handmade sausages stacked neatly in a row. It's feedlots, slaughterhouses, cold chain logistics, and temperature control across thousands of miles. The pantry aisle, it's global grain markets, monoculture farming. It's processing facilities that run 24 hours a day to support consumption. And something as simple we look at, it's probably used every day, cooking oil. It's not just oil. It's seed crops grown at scale that are processed, refined, shipped. We mistake stability for permanence. But in truth, grocery stores are very much like the wild we walk around in. They're their own ecosystems. And ecosystems don't fail because everything collapses at once. Just like in nature, they fail when one essential layer disappears. So let's get personal. If grocery stores close tomorrow, what do I have? Let's see. Say I have a freezer with wild protein. For me, I've got some wild sheep. I've got some fish. I've got maybe some venison and some duck. But that sounds secure, right? Until I look at what makes a meal. The other things. This is where people tend to kind of like gloss over that fact. Salt, oil, pepper, flour, rice, sugar, and of course, coffee.
The most important one.
Yeah. Wild protein is not food security by itself. It's a huge element. It's a protein, but it's just one ingredient. If olive oil disappears, my cooking changes immediately. If salt runs out, preservation changes. If flour disappears, bread disappears. We've built our palates around global inputs. We harvest locally, but we finish globally. A deer from Ontario, seared in olive oil from Spain, seasoned with pepper from Vietnam. We're more connected to the grocery store than we admit. When I think about my own connectivity, here in my freezer now, like if things close today, we tend to shop for groceries about every 3 days because we value the freshness. Not only, as we mentioned in our Hawaii episode, like Hawaii is largely reliable on imports. I think more so than a lot of other places. There are a lot of local farmers and local agriculture here, which we've tapped into, and even sort of gardening ourselves. I look at we're kind of at a mid shift in my garden. So I've got some squash available. I've got a little bit of tomatoes. I've got 3 giant bushes of Chinese cabbage, We just prepared kimchi, so that's sitting, fermenting. But inside the refrigerator, things are a little bare just because we're kind of shifting midweek into a new cycle of recipes and food for the weekend. And then as I look in the pantry, maybe some staples, maybe a box of pasta rattling around, maybe a jar of sauce, maybe, some rice here, but flour's probably minimum. Spices more than I probably need. But, it's really like that element of like the dependability on dry goods and canned goods. Like, I don't know that I want to solely rely on that. I still, in my mind, think about that as kind of like almost a survival part. And I want to focus more on the fresh stuff. And so it becomes challenging when you audit and sort of take self-stock. All right, day one, what are you going to do? What are you going to eat? The first meal is probably fine. The second meal, maybe okay. The third meal, you might be having some like canned tuna cakes or, something squished together. I don't know, Adam, when you take audit of yours, what do you have on hand?
Not looking too bad. I got a full freezer just full of, I got entire lamb in there and venison and ducks and geese and fish. So my protein would last a while if the power keeps going.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's one part of the equation. If the power went out due to whatever's happening, like in the pandemic, it didn't. But, in another situation, it might, like a weather situation or something like that. Then I'd be in dire straits, I think, trying to, maintain all that. But one thing that keeps me kind of stock full of pantry items is my desire to cook from everywhere around the world at any given point in time. So instead of a bag of rice, I have 5 different types of rices. And instead of this or that, I have 5 different types of that. So it does actually kind of build up my pantry, which would allow me to last a little longer. 2 things that I find really important. I'm not a prepper by any means, but I'd like to be prepared. I'm a Boy Scout at heart. Are salt and seeds. Salt is very important in terms of preserving things, making things last, in terms of pickling things, in terms of fermenting things. You need to use a lot of salts, and one little box of iodized table salt is not going to cut it. So I've
17 boxes of salt.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I buy bulk salt and backpack it and just put it away. And that just sits in the back of a pantry somewhere and never gets touched. And it's just this, big thing of salt that I can use if anything. If I had to preserve everything in that freezer because the power went out, I could probably do it. So that's something important that I keep around that would help. And the next thing is seeds, like vegetable seeds. To be able to grow your own stuff later on. I know that's not part of a cooking pantry per se. But every year I buy new seeds, whether I need them or not. And then I use last year's seeds to plant in my garden. And I keep that cycle going. So I always have a big box of seeds kicking around. Because they're like, $2 to $4 for a package of seeds. So it's quite cheap. And I know that I would really depend heavily on that if things went wrong. So I just like having the extra seeds kicking around. It's always good to have, I think. And then other than that, I don't know how long. My spices also would probably last for 3 years because I have way too many of those. I should probably personally audit my spices and go through and throw out some of them that have been hanging around for a while. But, we're under 4 feet of snow still here. So I wouldn't be getting anything fresh from the farmers around here, growing anything myself. So I'd be very reliant on my pantry and my freezer to get me through until growing season. So, yeah, it's crazy how short-lived that all this food would be.
Yeah, I think too, it's interesting when we talk about place as well, because I'm in a bit of a different geological or geographical position being in Hawaii. Like, our growing season is almost year round. Like, the summer's a little more challenging because of the heat, but it's still doable as long as you have access to water. Foraging here becomes a little easier because everything's green year round, so there's no snow. Planting here, I have a seed cache as well, like a 3-ring binder full of seeds for various plants that you could 100% survive off of. Everything from squash to tomatoes to peppers to whatever, to get a balanced sort of diet. And then with my proximity to the ocean, that protein source becomes a little more readily available. Of course, you're competing with everyone else who's also going to do that. But I think the access to food from an environmental standpoint is almost polar opposite of you, Adam, is like,
Yeah.
it's still here. Like, I could go out and just kind of find it at will. And I think because I'm also in an isolated place, like, I wouldn't see people like creeping into the space other than those that are here.
Yes. Yeah, you wouldn't see a lot of movement from the mainland down.
Yeah,
I
no.
don't think. Yeah.
Which is another interesting conversation unto itself of like, are we stuck where we are and what we have to deal with? Or, I think about, growing up in Oklahoma, we read The Grapes of Wrath as part of like our elementary education, and thinking about like packing up the truck and heading west to better growing country out in California. And it's like, well, do you sort of throw everybody in Granny's rocking chair on the back of the truck and off you go? Who knows?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'd be drinking a lot of pine bark tea or whatever, pine needle tea. Around here, there's not much I could be eating. But if the grocery stores did suddenly disappear, why don't we move forward and explore what that might look like in reality for kind of everyone. It's week 1 without stores. That's pretty manageable. Most people rotate through pantry goods. They'd be on like you said, a 3 to 5 day grocery cycle. So you got some food kicking around the house. You got the baked beans in the back of the pantry that you forgot about, and you can break open after 4 years. It's probably fine. Freezers are getting open. Comfort foods get prioritized, and fresh foods. By week 3, that changes a little bit. So your cooking oil is running low. Your rice is dwindled down to almost nothing. Your sugar's gone. Your coffee's gone, God forbid. And this is when hunters really start to feel confident. They're like, we'll be fine. We got deer. We got fish. We can hunt. We can live off the land. So easy. Like, no problems at all. And I hear this a lot. It's not just I hear it a lot from hunters. But while protein doesn't scale infinitely, if millions of households suddenly pivot towards hunting and fishing, wildlife populations will feel the pressure immediately, and a lot of those people wouldn't know what they're doing. They'd be applying pressure on deer populations. They'd be overfishing. They wouldn't be doing things logically. Even if they're not successful, they'd be influencing the ecosystems where you would be hunting. The small game would probably decline pretty quickly. Fishing access would be crowded. Out-of-season harvest would be increasing. Poaching would be rising like crazy. People would just stop caring about rules and law and whether something's going to be there for tomorrow. It's all about right now. Wild food operates on ecological timing and not the timing of panicking humans. We have a pretty delicate balance, and it's run by our agencies. It's run by conscientious hunters and anglers, but panicking humans don't react like that. You can't just declare it berry season or migratory bird season. You'd just be picking everything there is no matter what. I don't think this would be a romantic return to nature. It would be like chaos, and wildlife would pay first. And I've seen the effects of this, actually. I spent some time traveling through South Africa in the past, and we did a road trip from Johannesburg into Mozambique. And South Africa has always had very stringent anti-poaching rules and has maintained their wildlife populations quite well. But Mozambique for a long time was destroyed by civil war, by poverty, by famine, by hunger. And when you cross the border, you literally went from seeing animals like you were like, oh, there's another elephant blocking our way, like just animals everywhere, to no animals. You could barely see a bird. And it was like the exact border between the two countries. You could see the difference. And Mozambique was a land that was scraped clean by hungry, panicking people. And I don't blame them. I'm not judging them or anything. Like they were trying to save their families, but they completely reduced the country from animals, and it was crazy to see. And that's a very real reality. And those people weren't all accomplished hunters either. They were just managed to do it, and it could likely happen here.
I want to dive into this a little bit more. So there's this sort of theory when we come from like the legal side of things, right? Because I was just thinking about this as you were talking about it. And people justify crime primarily through, it's called neutralization theory, which suggests offenders who often subscribe to societal morals use specific rationalizations to temporarily neutralize guilt and justify their deviant behavior. Techniques would include like denying harm, blaming victims, appealing to higher loyalties. So there's like all kinds of mental things that are sort of like wrapped up into that, which, I may not harvest a elk in an antler restriction area at any given time because I know the antler restrictions. I know that there's a potential for the game warden to meet me at the end. I know there's a cost behind sort of me breaking the law. But would I substitute my, crying 6-year-old who's hungry and doesn't have any food to sort of neutralize that mentally and just choose to go out and shoot something that I knew wasn't in season or maybe small?
Especially when the game wardens are probably doing it to feed their own families.
Yeah,
too.
like
You're not the only one.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing of like I'm imagining, just as you mentioned, sort of similar to the situation in Mozambique of like some of those things would be out the window. And it's like I wonder at the point even we look through the lens of conservation from a scientific based standpoint, but at the end of the day, like humans still control our regulations. And how far would they just allow the systems to hold until they're like, actually, we have to lessen restrictions in order for people to survive?
Yeah. I think it's a pretty fragile net that's
It's
casting
wild.
everything,
It's so wild to think about.
If you're a QuickBooks customer looking to grow your business without the growing pains, you need the Intuit ERP. Upgrade to Intuit Enterprise Suite in a matter of hours. It's the AI-native ERP from the makers of QuickBooks. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
There's also a narrative that we like to tell ourselves as hunters, right? That we're insulated, that if the whole system sort of wobble, we're ready, we're prepared. And in fact, that we're more prepared than anyone else in our society. But let's think about that and peel it back just a little bit. So here's some things hunters rely on: fuel to reach the land, ammo supply chains, access agreements, electricity to freeze or store meat, salt from stores, tools that are largely manufactured somewhere else, replacement parts shipped globally. And being able to harvest an animal is one kind of competence, but being able to keep food stable without constant store access is another kind entirely. Most of us don't render fat at scale. Most of us don't salt fish for months. Most of us don't dry meat without electricity. We freeze everything. Freezing's convenience, but it's not resilience. Because if the power disappears, the freezers very quickly become a liability. So no, we're not immune. I've seen this through hurricanes a lot, right? The first thing you do is you kind of like, everybody will have like a hurricane party, a freezer clean out. You'll start to, pull out those choice cuts, invite family and friends over and grill and cook and bake and do all the things to use those products so they don't go bad. It's very interesting when you think about it from a hunting perspective, because that's like our sort of treasure trove. And we may have a head start in sort of the protein acquisition, but without starch, without salt, without oil, without people to help us do these things or supply the things we need, the protein doesn't really carry you that far. And I say that as someone who hunts, right? I don't think we're as secure as we think. And, a prime example, like, I can name off numerous natural disasters that affected all the way going back to to quickly affected people, even with predictions, even with human nature to say, I should go, I should stay, I should prepare, I should not prepare. I mean, let's talk wildfires on Maui. Let's talk Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, the devastating floods in the Carolinas, countless nor'easters and blizzards across the northern part of North America. Every hurricane season, people sort of politely hold their breath and hope for the best. And it's the Florida Panhandle and not the Florida Keys. It's, the Texas Gulf and not the Carolinas. And you play this sort of dodging and hoping game. And same for fire season across the West. Same for tornado season in any part of Tornado Alley. It's there, and it's only a moment away, and it's very, very, very concerning when we start to think about it. And this is not meant to sort of scare anybody. This is just made to think, right?
Yeah, and I think something you brought up about the hurricane parties is something I think is really important, and that's the social community coming together to keep everyone safe. And I think hunters and this isn't true across the board, but hunters are often individualistic kind of people. So it'd be more of them, or just them, or them and their families trying to make it go at it, and they think they could too. And maybe some of them could. Maybe some people have prepped very well, or maybe they're, excellent ancient style hunters that can, everything. But I don't know. Without that community, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but without that community, things get dangerous a lot faster. And inside the hunting world, there is a little bit of this individualistic kind of, pioneer approach. The rugged mountain man living alone or whatever is kind of a romantic ideal with it, and it's actually a bit of a dangerous way of living. But let's extend that timeline and see what happens. So, that we went into a couple weeks. What about a month later? So we're looking at freezer rotation. Our freezers is probably getting pretty slim, especially because we're relying more on protein than our starches and everything that we're normally eating, like pasta. And think of how much we're adding to a meal along with the protein. And even for all those no-carb people, you need carbs. You need carbs to live, and you're not going to live simply on protein. Or you can in some instances, but it's doesn't work for everyone. So, freezers are getting down, wildlife pressure is increasing, local anxiety is rising, things are going to get a little panicky. Month 2, your fats and your starches have become very scarce at this point. Salt becomes a very valuable commodity once again, like it once was. Seeds, garden seeds are very valuable suddenly, very hard to come by. Month 3, agriculture becomes a local priority. So people are planting, people are hoping, but you know what? Soil doesn't respond to any of this kind of urgency. Crops take time to grow. Certain crops might take 6 months to produce what you need from them. So you got to be patient, you got to wait, and you get hungry people are likely to eat the unripe fruits off of things before, you get the full nutritional value off of it. If you're starving and your squash plant has produced these little tiny squashes, it's tough not to eat those squashes. It's tough to wait another couple months for them to fully mature, Month 4 to 6, fertilizer shortages are affecting yields. Fuel shortages are affecting, tractors and farming equipment. Processing facilities are overwhelmed or just shut down. We'd likely see urban centers struggling the most. They have the least proximity to land and the highest population density, obviously. So you see rural areas faring better, and I can see everyone kind of feeling pretty good about themselves. Rural hunters, all the city people, whatever, but they're not faring that much better. You're still way more independent than you think. That wildlife carrying capacity is finite. You can't double your harvest rates and not see consequences. You can't lean on these small communities and have them keep producing. If we see ourselves overharvesting, recovery takes years and years. When I passed into Mozambique, it wasn't directly after Civil War, it's years later, and the animal life hasn't quite recovered. It's starting to very slowly come back. There's also the erosion of lawfulness. So if you had to stoop to poaching to feed your family during a crisis like this, and then things are slowly getting back to normal, and you and your kids have been poaching for the last 10 years. Do you stop poaching because things are getting better? Maybe, maybe not. You've eroded that law, and now it's hard to put it back into place. And I think there's still poaching that's happening in some of these places because that's how people have been feeding themselves for so long. But it's important to know that nature doesn't accelerate just because we're hungry. We still have to rely on the seasons and the swings of nature. This is all kind of partly why we started Wild Pantry, which is our other podcast series we've been going. We've had the freezer episode and the salt and curing episode so far. It's not like a survivalism thing. Neither of us are preppers, but it's more as a living memory. Like salting fish extends shelf life without electricity. It's something people always used to do. Rendering fat creates cooking stability. You have cooking fats in things like confit and the capability of storing meat long term. Fermenting vegetables preserves nutrients throughout the winter. Something that's very, very important to people who live in northern zones because winters are hungry times. And that's something we've forgotten. Drying meat removes dependence on refrigeration. All these were everyday techniques within living memory. People more of our great grandparents now, I guess, used to do this, and there's still older generations doing it today. You can see a lot of it through the Appalachians and places where people still rely a bit more on the old ways. They're not extreme prepper craziness. It's just practical. Food knowledge is actually cultural memory, and if we don't practice it, we lose it. And once that's lost, rebuilding it under pressure is far harder than maintaining it calmly, like right now. Just like survival skills, these things must be practiced before we need them. So you can't just like have the world fall apart and be like, I'm going to try drying meat, because that meat is so precious and you're going to probably screw it up and it's probably going to go bad. And if you had just practiced before, had that kind of a part of your general wild game routine every year, it would be easy to slip into that if something went bad. But it's just like trying to learn how to start a fire without a lighter while you're trying to survive in the woods, and you're tired and you're hungry and you're pissed off and you're emotional. Like, good luck starting a fire. One good thing that I've been seeing, and I think we can see that with the interest in our Wild Pantry series, is that like kind of the millennial generation, which I'm part of, kind of on the earlier side of millennials, I guess. They're all out there, or not all of them. Some of them are out there relearning their grandparents, great-grandparents' skills. And that's something we've been kind of doing. We're like breaking into making our own sausage, grinding our own meat, making fermented things, pickling, canning, like all these things were just normal things our grandparents did that our parents many of our parents kind of skipped and lost. But I really like that that's kind of happening now. Do you see that from your side of the world?
Yeah, I think so too. I think people largely over the last probably 15 years or so have been approaching food differently. And I think there's been several sort of like short crises that have really showed us a lot through that lens of like the fragility of the food system, but also like dependability becomes kind of a concern to those that are like, holy smokes, like I want to have my independence, and I've seen the crises, so I want to be more independent, I want to be more self-sufficient, and I want to be able to sort of like be that solid provider. And I think growing up as consumers of, microwave meatloaf and canned green beans and, ramen and bologna sandwiches and things like that, some of those, economically driven, but also some of those are access driven as well. I mean, we still exist where you have food deserts and you have places where people don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, and like the dependability there becomes on a different type of grocery store, and it becomes on a processed food, and it's just so much. But there's also like many other layers to this, and one of those is like when the abundance disappears, the preference would probably also disappear too. Mm-hmm. So you don't eat what you crave, you eat what's there. Seasonality starts to become a real driving force. It's not just a passing restaurant fad. It's strawberries in February become impossible because, the giant freezers where they're stored at get wiped out. They can't be distributed before they perish fully. Meals probably simplify. I would imagine, too, even, you and I both favor a lot of international flavors and international cuisine. I think you would see that probably shift a lot.
Oh yeah, that would disappear pretty quickly.
Yeah. Meals would look a lot more simple, a lot more like your protein, your veggies, your starch, or whatever combination of that you choose. But food
probably those like old medieval cauldrons that
probably like soups. Soups and stews would start to take prominence, especially with the lack of oil.
Out of bones. Yeah.
Food would become negotiated, shared, traded, hoarded likely, and that choice via either cooperation or isolation will probably define the culture more than abundance ever did. You don't need your neighbor's garden if you have a produce aisle. You don't need to borrow flour if you can buy it at 10 o'clock at night from a grocery store. You don't need to trade fish for potatoes if both are stacked neatly under fluorescent lights. That independence feels like progress. And in many ways it is. But if those doors close, even briefly, something's going to shift. It's not just our diets, it's our relationships. Because the moment you don't have everything you need, you have two choices. You can isolate or you can cooperate. And maybe grocery stores haven't made us selfish. They've just made us unnecessary to one another. And if grocery stores are empty, we don't just rediscover scarcity, we rediscover resilience.
Yeah, just a closing thought, I think for me, it's like that's something I mentioned already about hunters often being independent. This general lack, we saw it in pandemic times, partially because of the spread and everything, but people isolating themselves and not helping each other, and people kind of getting sick and dying in that way. It's such a different, as hunters, we often think like this rugged independence is a good thing, but in real times of disaster, crises, I think community, whether it's small or big, is what gets you through. And you're not going to be good at everything. You're not going to have everything. You're not going to have time to do everything. And the only way you can have what you need to get by, I think, is through a community of people all lending a hand. And in bad times and food scarcity, you saw way more of that. And I think that's what would be necessary to get people through. You'd be more likely to survive any of this stuff by having a community garden that's protected and tended by the people in your general community, with wild game being brought in by the people who know how to do that. I think that's a more likely story of resilience and than having no reliance on other people and just striking out on your own. Maybe you'll survive, maybe you'll do it. There's some people who are very capable, but the general hunter who's eating out of their freezer and watching TV at night, and I'm not judging, that's me too. It's not as easy as it seems, and being a hunter isn't just like a get a jail free card if the grocery store's closed. I think it's something we should all kind of take a step back and hang our egos up on the hook for a little while and think about it succinctly like that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, like we've sort of downplayed the grocery store in this conversation, but there's something special. Even still, they represent one of the greatest logistical achievements, I think, in human history. The ability to move all those things and have them in one central place. The evolution of kind of the market, you think, through historical times, and they provide abundance. There's a safety net there, and there's a variety beyond anything that any other generations have ever imagined. I don't think they're the bad guys, but they're so seamlessly intertwined with our daily life that we mistake them for permanent. And I think that's the error. So maybe the grocery stores will hum along for decades without interruption. Maybe this is purely hypothetical, our conversation today. But also maybe the real question is, it's not whether the grocery stores will disappear. Maybe it's whether we've forgotten how to live without them. Maybe we've forgotten how important community is. And remembering doesn't require panic and hoarding and overzealous prepping and a closet full of toilet paper. It just simply requires practice and reviving sort of that cultural knowledge that we have and tapping into that. That's, I think, probably the more resilient piece out of this whole conversation, is sometimes in order to look towards the future, we have to look towards the past.